Hi everyone. This video is going to cover the notes that start on page 27 in your packets. And in this video we're going to be talking about solving equations, but now they're going to be a little more complex. So they're going to be what we call multi-step equations. Now the nice thing about these equations is that the only real new step is the first step, and after that they're going to be the same equations that you're used to solving. So again, our goal for today is to solve multi-step equations involving either distributing or combining like terms. Now those are skills that we learned back in Chapter 2, so the first thing we're going to do is just quickly review both combining like terms and the distributive property. So that's what these first four examples are about. So in number 1, I see I have 4 terms of my expression. And I don't have any parentheses, so I know I'm not going to have to distribute. Remember, that was kind of our signal before that we needed to distribute, was if we saw parentheses. So I know for number 1, this is a problem where I'm going to have to combine like terms. So I'm going to make myself a note here. And if you think back, remember we said like terms are terms that have the same variable raised to the same exponent. So we're not really focused on the coefficient, but more just on the variable. So if I look at my equation, I notice I have a 7x, and I have a positive 2x. So those are going to be like terms because they both have the variable x. Now combining those, and I know I'm going to write over my words here, but combining those, since I included this plus sign with my term, to combine them, all I'm going to do is add 7 and 2. So that's going to give me a 9x. So now I look at my next terms. I have a positive 5, so that's a constant term. And then I have a minus 1, which is also a constant term. And remember, constant terms are like terms as well. So I'm going to combine those. Now, I have a plus 5 and a minus 1. So in my calculator, I would do 5 minus 1. And since that's a positive 4, my term would be plus 4. And now that expression would be simplified because it no longer has any like terms. So my second example, again, I don't see any parentheses, so I know I'm combining like terms. This one we have to be a little bit careful. If I look at my first term, it's 3x squared. So if I'm going to find a like term with that term, I know it also has to have an x squared. So this one doesn't have the squared, it can't be a like term. Neither does this one, but I notice this has an x squared. So those are going to go together. And now when I combine them, I have 3x squareds, and I'm subtracting 4 of those. So I'm going to do 3 minus 4 gives me a negative 1. And again, I don't write the 1. You can, but usually as a convention we don't. So I have a negative and x squared. And then when I look at what's left, I have a negative 2x and a positive x. And again, if it helps you to think of it, there's really a 1 in front of there. So when I go to my calculator to combine those, what I'm going to do is negative 2 plus 1. And since that's a negative 1, my coefficient of x is going to be a negative 1, and then I have my variable x. So those terms have been combined. Now, in number 3 and 4, now I see those parentheses, and that's going to tell me that I have to distribute. So here before is where we used our arrows, right? And we know distributing means that we have to use multiplication. So this is where we drew our arrows, and the arrows were telling us what to multiply. So first I'm going to multiply 2 times x, which gives me 2x. Now on my second one here, I have to do 2 times a negative 5. So in my calculator, I would do 2 times negative 5, and I get a negative 10. So now my parentheses are gone, and I've simplified that expression. So for the last one, we're doing the same thing. Now the factor that I'm distributing just happens to be negative. Here I have a negative 3 times 2 gives me a negative 6x. And then a negative 3 plus 1 is a negative 3. So these are the skills that we're going to be adding to our equations when we're solving. So my notes here say when solving equations with like terms or parentheses, we need to simplify one side of the equation before we solve, and that's the new part that we have with these equations. So it says, remember, an expression is simplified if it has no parentheses and no like terms. Once we get rid of that, we're really just going to have a two-step equation left. So once both sides of the equation are simplified, we can solve the equation by undoing. Remember, we always undo our addition or subtraction first. And then our multiplication or division. So with all that in mind, now we're going to go ahead and do some practice problems. All right, so let's start with number 5. So now, the first thing I'm deciding is whether I need to distribute or combine like terms. So if I look at number 5, I don't have any parentheses. And so that's giving me a clue that I probably am going to need to combine some like terms. So again, I'm going to put my line there just to separate my left and right hand sides because, again, I only want to work on one side of the equation at a time. So now if I look at my equation, this side is just a constant. So you can think for right now, we're really just going to ignore that side of the equation. Nothing's going to happen with that quite yet. So now I'm going to look at my left-hand side of my equation, and I notice that I have like terms. I have a 7x, and I have a minus 3x. So I'm going to go ahead and combine those. 7 minus 3 gives me 4x, and I'm going to bring down that minus 8. Now, I'm going to copy down the 24. That hasn't changed. And hopefully what you can see here now is that we just really have a two-step equation. So I treat this the same as we have been. I first get rid of the constant that's on the same side as the variable. So my variable is on the left side. That constant is a minus 8. So to undo that, I'm going to add 8 to both sides. So that's going to cancel. I bring my 4x down. And then 24 plus 8 gives me 32. Now I just have a one-step equation. So I'm going to divide by 4. My 4 is going to cancel, and I get x equals 8. Now, it seems like it worked out fine, but I do want to do a quick check of my answer. It's always a good idea, guys, to check those answers. So my original equation was 7x minus 3x minus 8, and it should be equal to 24. So I'm going to draw my line, and everywhere I see an x, I'm going to substitute with 8 because that's what I think the solution is. So now I'm going to use my calculator to check this out, see how I did. So I'm going to enter it exactly the way I wrote it here. So 7 parentheses 8 minus 3 parentheses 8 and then minus 8. And we get 24. So since that matches my right side, I know my answer is correct. Okay. Number 6 is exactly the same type of problem. We're going to be distributing here as well. And again, all this stuff that I need to work with is really on my left-hand side, so that's where I'm going to start. The only trick here is to really be careful with my sign. So I have a negative 8x and a minus 3x. The 4 is kind of my loner term, so we'll take care of him in a minute. So now I'm going to be really careful when I'm combining that I'm doing a negative 8 minus 3. And I get negative 11, and I bring that x with. And now my plus 4 comes down, and that's equal to 26. So now again, two-step equation. The first thing I do is move that constant over. So I have negative 11x. 26 minus 4 gives me 22. I divide by negative 11, because remember, I had to divide by the same number and sign. So since this is negative 11 up top, I divide by a negative 11. So then I get x equals a negative 2. And again, I'm going to check my answer. So negative 8x minus 3x plus 4 equals 26. So my hope is that when I substitute negative 2 everywhere I see an x, my answer should come out as 26. So I have negative 8 times a negative 2 minus 3 times a negative 2 plus 4. And if I go back to my calculator, negative 8 times negative 2 minus 3 times negative 2 plus 4, and we get 26. So I've got 26 on both sides. Okay, so now we're going to do a couple examples with distributing, and we won't go through all of them, just a couple to give us the idea. So here's number 7. Again, these parentheses here are what tell me that I'm going to be distributing. So I'm going to focus on the left-hand side. Again, 18 is here. That's just going to stay there for a minute. So the first thing I need to do is distribute. So I'm going to get 6x plus 6 times 2 is 12. I know that's equal to 18. And so now, again, a basic two-step equation. I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. I get 6x is equal to 18 minus 12 is 6. I can divide both sides by 6, and I get x equals 1. So let's check that answer. 6 times x plus 2 is equal to 18, we hope. So now, wherever I have x, I'm going to plug in a 1. So now it's 6 times 1 plus 2. And again, you can probably, hopefully, work most of these out in your head, but it's worth a plug into the calculator just to be sure. So I'm going to type in 6 times 1 plus 2, and I get 18, which is what I was hoping for. And so we know we're correct. So let's flip over. I'm just going to pick one of these because you'll see the others in practice. So let's look at number 9. The only thing that makes 9 a little bit different here is that now everything's kind of happening on the right side, but it doesn't change my process. So again, I can kind of think of just covering up the left side for right now. And here, I don't see a number, but remember that we know there's really a 1 there. So what I'm distributing is a negative 1. So now I have negative 1 times x is a negative 1x. A negative 1 times a negative 5 is going to give us a positive 5. So now I've simplified that side, and I know that's all equal to 13. Again, basic two-step equation here. I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. That's going to cancel. I'm left with my negative x, and on my other side I get 8. Now, x isn't quite alone because, again, I know I have this negative 1 in front that's being multiplied by x. So to undo that, I need to divide. So both sides are going to be divided by negative 1, and I get x is equal to a negative 8. Again, last step is to check. So my original equation was 13 equals the opposite of x minus 5. So I'm going to plug in where I have x, I put in a negative 8 minus 5. And again, please check this in your calculator. A lot of us are trying to do things in our head and making some computational errors and not catching our errors in the equation. So now I'm just plugging this in. So I have a negative, right? I'm using my negative key down here. So negative parentheses, negative 8 minus 5. And that gives me a positive 13, which is what I was looking for. Okay, so we're going to stop at this point, and then you'll have a chance to do lots of practice with this to make sure you've got it down.